draw 56 stick people. That's rigor, people. That's rigor. That's stupid. That's insulting to her. She knew the answer. She shouldn't have to draw 56 stick people. Ridiculous. What I didn't know then is what we had adopted was Common Core. It was in our state. We had jumped off the cliff early where I was. But this is what math looks like now. 36 times 12. You add steps in the margin for error in order to get, this is rigor, right here, rigor. 3 plus 3, if you're a first grader, you have first grader. 3 plus 3 is?
6.
Okay, explain. Yeah? 3. Okay, explain, but you got to write in a sentence because that's rigorous. Right? I can't just say that. You can't show your work because that's wrong. 3 plus 3, what is Common Core? They're going to tell you it's math and English language arts standards only. That's not true. We'll go through that today. I call this approach, everybody, a shotgun approach. We're going to move fast and we're going to cover much. You can take notes. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, as the ladies will be. You can jump in if you see anything that needs to be addressed. But if I can get my clicker, okay. What we're up against are what we call talking points. DESE, I'm going to use this acronym a lot today, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They put out many talking points that look the same. They call Common Core now the Missouri Learning Standards. They're getting to be pretty controversial. We heard Senator John Lamping, the beginning of this session. He stood in front of a group of us and he told us that at the very beginning of last legislative session, he said only 3 senators had ever even heard the term Common Core. 3. Isn't that what he said? 3. Last session. This session is the hottest thing going because they know when you can name it, you can fight it. But they're pretty tricky about what they call it. They call it the Missouri Learning Standards. Make no mistake, it's Common Core that you're dealing with. They want to change the name because it's becoming too controversial. What our experience has been, that in our journey in trying to figure out what it was, last year on May 3rd, DESE had meetings across the state, but because what was happening at the state level is these ladies, we were fighting to get a Senate bill called SB 210. I got so many bills in my head right now from this year. SB 210, it was a Senate bill. And what that Senate bill, all that would have done in Missouri is it would have caused the Department of Education to go into each of the 8 congressional districts and do a question and answer session. So if you had a question, they would have to answer your question, because there's lots of questions, and that's okay. We live in America, right? But the problem is that they got worried about SB 210. They got worried about it because it was getting some momentum and bipartisan support, because it also asked that for DESE, they had to go into each of the 8 congressional districts, and they had to do a cost analysis. They had to tell every district what the implementation would cost, or give an approximate. You know what happened to that bill? It got through the House with bipartisan support. It was benign, you would think. But the chairman of the Education Committee for the Senate, on the last day of session, he stood and he filibustered the bill. He killed the bill dead on the floor. Because what had just happened was DESE had gone in preemptively to each of the 8 congressional districts. And what they did is they held meetings simultaneously on the same night. And when you went into them, did anybody here go to those meetings? Yes, yes. I raised that. What they did is you went into the meeting, and I'm not kidding, probably 120 people in Camdenton, that's where my meeting was. And there was a fella in a suit from DESE, and he gets up and he reads from a script. Thank you for coming tonight. You can see a video on the department's website, and he played it. And then he went back to his script, and he read, we will not be answering questions tonight, but if you have a question, you can write them down on a piece of paper. I mean, he didn't say piece of paper, but you can write them down, and we'll take them back to the department, and we'll post answers on our website. Do you think that has ever happened to this day? No. They wanted to do something called the Delphi technique and break everybody into small groups, set them all at a table, kind of divide and conquer. But the beauty is, these women, I think that's you, Ann, in this picture. No, is that you? No. They were in this meeting. And they can attest to the fact that group and another group in the state said, we're not breaking into groups. There's video of it. You can actually Google the video. It is delicious. I love it. It's like better than real TV. They said we came with questions, Desi. We're not leaving without answers. And they got a little ugly. But you know what? That's what's been happening. Because as teachers and parents have had more and more questions, and when you feel ignored, you get a little bit mad. But that's what's been happening. So they would break into groups, and it was kind of pitiful, to be honest. The lady from Desi, it wasn't her fault. She didn't have any answers, but they put her out in front of those people. It wasn't her fault. It's not the superintendent's fault that they don't have answers, or your school board members' faults that they don't have answers. They've been pushed out in front. Just know that. We're not enemies with our school districts. They don't know what to do either. They just know they've been told what to do. But what happened was in this little school district, okay, I get confused. Okay. Oh, I'm going to go to this slide. What this video is, and I'll play it briefly, but what we started to see was this kind of creepy trend. They wouldn't answer any questions, but we had tons of them. And then about a couple weeks after the meetings that Desi had in Missouri, there was a meeting in Maryland that went viral. Have anybody seen this meeting? It's a dad. It's the Department of Education in Maryland, and they're conducting meetings like was supposed to happen in all of our congressional districts. But the thing that we noticed is they wouldn't answer questions either. So you're going to have to track with the video, but if dad gets fed up, kind of like these ladies did in Lindbergh, they didn't get arrested, but this dad does. Go ahead, Sophie. Dad has just stood up. The camera's going to swing in a second. And they're a little shocked because he shouldn't be standing up. But the dad's fed up, so you hear the facilitator trying to quiet him down.
Not the best schools. I still think we're not the best schools. Why do we not love them?
Sir, I want to say this. Out of all fairness,
I went to community college. I finished at the University of Maryland. And now I moved my family out to Howard County because of the reputation of these schools.
Okay, so in all fairness,
Facilitator's trying to quiet him.
questions. I do want to be fair, sir.
Community college. And, it's a so
Sir.
my question is, how are we, you're talking about college, you're not talking about which college, you're not preparing them for world partner. Okay, my question is, how is lowering America's education standards to prepare these for community college? Because that's what it's all about. Because you mentioned before, that, the emphasis is, and I have some stuff here to quote before this guy tries to carry me out.
Okay.
Parents pay full. This is not a legal thing. Let's go.
Let him ask his question.
This is what I would say. In fairness to everyone who asked questions, where you have some that are dovetailing to that.
Let him ask his question.
The next question. So this is a dovetail.
Don't stand for this. Fine, you're sitting here like cattle. You have questions. You confront them. They don't want to do it in public.
Okay.
That night, he was booked for 6 months. He was facing 6 months in jail until it went viral. This is a problem, guys, because as my hand to God, Desi still won't answer the most basic questions that educated parents have. And there's a bunch of them in the room, teachers in this room, that have the same questions. The issue is this little school district that we had gone to down in East Newton, Missouri. They had us come and speak, and we did, and they had about 60 people at their first meeting. But they didn't feel that it was right not to hear Desi's side. They wanted to be able for Desi to come and say, please present. We've heard the other side now. You'll come back, please. We want to hear your side. So they wrote a letter, but this is what Desi said to them, thank you for your invitation to participate in your community meeting at East Newton. I'm sorry it took so long. But he said the department's not going to be expending any more resources on individual community meetings. As if they had them. He indicated that our open meetings were held on May 2nd, actually it was May 3rd, and we would not be presenting at other meetings at this time. We have an abundance of information on our website, we gave the link. He said on that site are PDF links to lists of questions that came out of each of our 8 regional meetings held on May 3rd. And I'm told that it will soon have links to the answers to all of those questions. Do you think that's happened to this day? No. We still have the same questions. Well, they didn't just say, okay. They wrote back. And they said this, thanks for posting. They actually said at the top, we'll be happy to pay your expenses. We'll send a car for you. We'll pay for you to come back. They said, thanks for posting. Now there's questions on the website, but we already have questions. Well, we are lacking our answers. Since this will be implemented in the fall, it would help a lot to get answers. 185 people showed up at their meeting at the gymnasium at East Newton. They had a big chair in the middle of the stage with Desi's name on it. They didn't come. What happened not too long after that was that their school board signed a resolution that said, we have this question, and this question, and this question, and this question, and this question. And they sent it to the legislature and said, no one is answering our questions. We feel it is irresponsible to implement Common Core. We will do so under duress. Because here's the problem, guys. Your district has no choice. The federal government and the state is involved. They will lose their accreditation, or so they're told, unless they implement. I'm so sad that this actually does not look right. But what happened was that Desi put out a press release. And their lady, or PR person from Desi, her name's Sarah Potter, she actually said, it would be right here, oopsie, it would be right here if my slide was working, but there's the link. But what she said, she called us a small but vocal group of parents who had hijacked the talk about Common Core. And it wouldn't make a difference because the education community all agreed it was the best thing. Well, what I've always said about that is, we're not a small group. In 2012, for whatever it's worth, the party platform for at the RNC in 2012, they actually signed a resolution denouncing Common Core. So for the Republican legislature to not acknowledge that, they actually dealt with it. They identified it directly in the party platform. These are the states right now. The blue states never adopted the Common Core state standards. The red states all have active legislation right now fighting to get it out of their state. As the awareness grows of what it is, the fight is getting hotter and hotter in each of these states. Actually, last week, the governor of Indiana, Hoosiers rejected Common Core and a call for state autonomy. They want to control their own standards and their own tests. This is what happened in our legislature, February 18th of this year. Did anybody go? Oh, yay! It was the first time the education lobby, this is what I've learned, is that the education lobby in Missouri has never been challenged. Because that would take people volunteering and people standing up to Goliath. You know what happens when a bunch of mad moms have had enough? Oh, we take on Goliath. We say, bring it, Goliath, because that's what's happening right now. This is a lot of moms with their kids, teaching their kids what their constitution should look like. This was February 18th. These are the kids. The signs were awesome. You have awoken my mommy. The signs were awesome. Here are bills. I'm not data. They were awesome. It was an inspiring day. But here's the other part, is that in New York, now get this, Race to the Top was a contractual obligation to implement the Common Core State Standards Initiative, which means they basically fast-tracked in the states of New York, California, Kentucky, and Tennessee the Common Core standards. When everyone says we don't know where we're headed, we say, oh yes, we do. They're common standards, same exact tests, same exact results as we're going to expect. But what happened is the teachers union in New York, this just came out, January 26th of this year, now get this is from Politico, the New York teachers turn on Common Core. The largest union in the state of New York that represents 600,000 teachers in New York alone. They denounced Common Core. The board of the New York State Teachers Union this weekend unanimously withdrew its support for the Common Core standards as they have been implemented, a major blow to Common Core advocates who have been touting the support from teachers as proof that the standards will succeed. We'll have to be the first to say it's failed, said Richard Nunez, president of the New York State United Teachers. When you hear that teachers love it, those don't, and they're ahead of us. This is where we're headed. This is where we're headed. Same standards, same test. Kill Common Core bill. This was last week. What happened when the education lobby walked into the hearing room? They all kind of stepped back because the parents of Missouri filled every seat in the House before they could get a seat. They all had to sit in the hall. It was kind of delicious. These, though, I'm going to let Gretchen address this just real quick. The witness forms, 1,300 in less than 48 hours is an all-time record. It gives me goosebumps. 1,300 in less than 48 hours. They carried them in, they put them on the floor, they made a huge thud because it was hurting the girls back who carried them in. But talk about the map just real quickly, Gretchen. I mean, the map, that Ron Calzone's map, is for people all over the state. You told me that this morning. Talk about that just real quick.
Yes, if you go to Missouri Education Watchdog, that's our blog. I did publish that before I left St. Louis area today. Ron Calzone of Missouri First has this great Liberty Tools, it's called, and he will send you, if you get on his list, he will send you witness statements that already have the bill numbers on it. You just put in your name, it automatically goes to your senator and your representative, but the great thing about it is that after they're all done, he sends out a visual, and it shows where the witness forms originated from in the state. So you can imagine 1,335 witness forms, and we've heard that this is just a rural issue. No, it's all over the state. There are these little red markers, and there's a huge concentration in St. Louis, huge in Kansas City. They're spread out everywhere. So please go to Missouri Education Watchdog. Really look at that map and see that there's support for what Stacy's talking about to push against Common Core from all over the state of Missouri.
And from all walks of life, I got an email from a dad, and he acknowledged himself. He was an Occupy Wall. He is an Occupy Wall Street guy. He's that guy. He says, I'm a very liberal dad, and I oppose Common Core and the privatization of education as much as the next guy. So to put him in a box and say we all fit one mold is completely irresponsible. This represents people from all walks of life, all political affiliations. It's quite a beautiful thing, actually. NEA, the National Education Association, what was happening across the country. Now, NEA, again, they're going to try and tell you that this is conservative. The NEA is not. But they actually, Politico put out a story. This just came out. You can see it at the bottom. It was 2/10/14. The story came out, but it's, oh darn it, I don't know how to go back. Hang on. Basically, they slammed the implementation, and you go to Politico and read the story as botched. They've rescinded their endorsement of Common Core because the teachers are screaming so loudly in the states where it's going poorly, and that's every state. The Farm Bureau, just a couple weeks ago, actually, they sent out a press release. We oppose the implementation of the Common Core standards at the state and federal level. Do you have any further questions? New York teachers, I've already done that. There it is. They're pulling back and they're once enthusiastic. Congressional opposition at the federal level, guys. I'm going to skip through some of this pretty quick. But this came out February 12th of 2014 after 9 GOP senators introduced resolutions opposing the Common Core state education standards. House Republicans have taken up the cause with a total of 43 members signing on to the measure. They say classrooms cannot and should not be coerced into adopting federal academic standards. That's not just my belief, it's federal law. One of the representatives said that. 1,500, now get this fact. 1,500 principals from the state of New York just sent an open letter out to parents. They're rebuking the Common Core standards because it's hurting kids and it's hurting teachers in their state. And I know people will say, well, that will never happen in Missouri. Do you think they could fix it if they could? Would the principals fix it if they could? To think that your principal will have the ability to keep it from happening just like it has in 1,500 schools in New York is naive. The letter is definitely worth reading. I'm going to skip it. There's so much more to cover. You're going to hear terms when they talk about Common Core, college and career ready. Do you know what that means? Well, we're going to tell you in a second. Rigor. I call it rigor vomit. If you go to a hearing in Jefferson City, you hear Desi say, it's rigor, it's rigor. I'm like, rigor vomit. It just makes you just say it so much. The way it rolls off the tongue, it's a joke. Just because they say it doesn't make it so. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's better. 21st century skills, globally competitive. But you're going to see weird things like the Chamber of Commerce, PTA, ExxonMobil. They're all about standards. It's weird. Standards of all things. We'll tell you why, and I'll tell you why in a second. You're also going to hear this fact. It helps the kids who move state to state. It's fair. That's the best. That's what you're going to hear. They're going to draw your sympathy. Here's the fact. The U.S. Census Bureau data actually says that kids don't move across state lines when they're growing up. As little as 0.3% of children actually move across state lines. That's an empty argument when it comes to supporting Common Core.
And the children that do move, the largest proportion move within 8 miles, so they generally are staying within the same district. While their physical residence may change, they don't typically change districts.
And that's a powerful point because, again, they want you to think kids are moving out. So if you're moving to Wisconsin from Missouri, it's kind of like Burger King. If you order a Whopper here, you're going to get a Whopper there that looks exactly the same thing. But what that calls for are scripted lessons that match across state lines. That's not American. It's just not. This one's a great one. Great one. They're going to tell you over and over again, Common Core is internationally benchmarked. But they don't say how. The fact is these standards have never been tested or proven effective, never. There is no empirical evidence that they work. None. You know, what I remind people is when we talk about how kids in America, they are just getting dumber and dumber every year. Those teachers, they are not doing their job. That's what they try to convince us of. That's a lie. When we compare our kids internationally to the kids in China, let me ask you, does every child in China get an education, K through 12, regardless of their disability? Every child get an education in China? No. In Korea or Japan, does every child? No. But every child in the United States of America gets an education regardless of disability. So we're comparing apples to oranges a lot. But here's a quote I think is really interesting. Because, actually this is the wrong quote, but what Arne Duncan acknowledges over and over, I'm going to skip this actually. He talks about change, and I'll go ahead. He talked about in this, when you talk about the internationally competitive, he goes to UNESCO, and you can get all of Arne Duncan's speeches if you go to ed.gov, which is the Department of Education's website. You can actually see all of his speeches at length. But he talks about districts now having to engage into interventions to foster some dramatic changes in these schools. This will be some of the hardest and most controversial and most important work you'll see coming from the United States this school year and in the years ahead. He talks about being controversial. He said this, the United States now has a unique opportunity to transform our education system in ways that will resonate for decades to come. Last year and this year, the federal government provided unprecedented funds to support the reforms in education. Teachers think this is just like No Child Left Behind. What happens with those funds? Cooperative agreements, memorandums of understanding, contracts, if you will, have been signed with the federal government that obligate us because of those funds at a local level. I'll go into that in a second. But here's one thing that I think is interesting. As you start researching, why would we sign on to these? Because here's the thing. We already had excellent standards. And we just passed this bill in 2007 where some of the smartest mathematicians and high school math teachers, 400 in fact, had come together for a year and a half to draw up incredible standards for a year and a half. They worked. So your college professors worked with high school teachers, 400, to come up with Missouri standards that were really, truly special. And actually it got voted on, and you can go to Vote Smart. It passed the House. This was actually bundled in SB 389, a Senate bill. And those standards were approved by the governor, the House, and the Senate. The Common Core got brought in the year they were supposed to be implemented, and guess what happened to those standards? They got put on a shelf. We have standards in Missouri. People say, well, what do we do? What do we do if we don't go to Common Core? Well, this is a really good place to start. We have excellent standards. But this is what in the ESEA is the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which is also the same as No Child Left Behind. And in Missouri's waiver, because we had to get a waiver in order not to have the gavel drop down on us from No Child Left Behind, where everybody had to be 100% proficient. But this is interesting because your Commissioner of Education in Missouri acknowledges something in this application. And this comes from desi.mo.gov. And she said from 93 till 2010, Missouri operated under highly regarded content and performance standards that specified what content students should know and be able to perform at each grade level and upon graduating. Missouri state standards have been acclaimed nationally among the top 3 in the country. Why would we deviate? Why? Well, No Child Left Behind put us on a fast track. This was a Republican thing. They set us up largely to fail. It was ridiculous, and it was a failure. But I ask you, why do we expect Common Core to be any different? Why? If we thought No Child Left Behind was a nightmare, why are there people fighting for Common Core? We say they don't understand the full implication. Common Core violates 3 federal statutes in the 10th Amendment. I'm going to go through them just very, very quickly. You heard about the first on the video. GEPA is one, the General Education Provisions Act. There are 3 federal laws that protect us from the Federal Department of Education overstepping and becoming involved in local education. Do you know why? The centralization of power over education is dangerous. It means the centralization of the message. So, Department of Education Organization Act is the second, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of '65 is amended by No Child Left Behind. That's the one Diane Ravitch was talking about. It actually says the federal government can't spend any money on instruction or the development thereof. There are tons and tons and tons, and the ladies know this, of Missouri statutes, but here's just one that shows we're breaking our own statute over and over again by the Common Core. It says this: the State Board of Ed shall develop written curricular frameworks that may be used by schools. Also implies may not. They were frameworks and standards. It says such curricular frameworks shall incorporate the academic performance standards adopted by the state. It goes on to say, the curriculum framework shall provide guidance to school districts but shall not be mandates for local school boards in the adoption or development of curricula. We'll go there in a second. They say it was state-led. It was never state-led. Common Core has nothing to do with standards. It's all about control. Abraham Lincoln said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. Whose philosophy are we following? The fact is the Common Core state standards was they say this, a state-led initiative. It's not true. It was written by the standards were actually written, they're owned by 2 private trade organizations. Now you hear over and over again, well, the governors all wrote them. Well, there are actually 2 organizations. The first one's called the National Governors Association. It's a private trade organization. Do you know what that means? Not all governors belong. It's just a name that sounds really awesome. Like every governor belongs and everybody's part of this. Not true. The problem, it's a private trade organization, so we really don't know who belongs because we can't sunshine request any of their information. But this governor actually says he doesn't belong. The governor of Maine, Paul LePage, he doesn't even belong to the NGA, and he says this: I don't believe in Common Core, I believe in raising America's education standards. These governors, Haley, Pence, Bentley of Alabama, these are just a few. Governor Perry, they're all against the Common Core standards. None of them endorse the Common Core. In fact, the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, he just pulled his state out of the testing component of Common Core. The governor of Branstad of Iowa, he signed an executive order addressing Common Core, the crisis of Common Core in his state. Indiana, their governor, just signed by Mike Pence, makes Indiana the first state to step back from the standards that established proficiency targets. Their state pulled back, they want autonomy. All governors do not endorse Common Core. That's a lie. But the other agency is called the CCSSO. So you hear them say all the time, governors and chiefs. That would be like Krista Castro, the Commissioner of Education. They have their own club too. We don't know who belongs, but they're on their website. If you go to their website, they're very, whoopsie. Let's see if I go back. Uh-oh. I'm gonna get used to this by the time this is over today, and I'm gonna love it. It's so nice, but I'm totally. They talk about transforming our nation's public education system. I say, who asked them to do that? Did we ask for that? They also talk about meetings. They have over 100 meetings per year, they say, but they're closed to the public. Attendance is by invitation only. These are the companies, the entities, I should say, that own our standards. You go to the standards website, here it is, guys, right here, corestandards.org. You see right here, the CCSSO and the National Governors Association. So they sound very authoritative, like they're government entities. They are not. They're private trade organizations. The problem is they're copyrighted standards. Copyrighted means you cannot deviate. What the standards actually, it shows you that in the terms of use. But this is what's very interesting. If you go to the Federal Register of July 29th, 2009, this is what you find. Common set of K through 12 standards means a set of content standards that define what students must know and be able to do and that are identical across states in a consortium. Now your district may say, oh, we can change them. We can do what we want. The Federal Register says the standards will be identical. Here's the kicker. 15%, you can adapt 15%. So if your district wants to do some cursive, it's got to fit within that 15%. Missouri history is by constitution, they have to teach, I think, in 5th grade. 15% has to fit within that model. Because it tells you on your Federal Register, they have to be identical across state lines. Notwithstanding this, a state may supplement the common standards with an additional standards, provided that the additional standards do not exceed 15%. That 15% that you can add. So when we hear DESE say, oh no, we can add and adapt, but here's the part they don't say. Only up to 15% of which will never be assessed. Okay? That's a really big fact. Here's the other thing. If you go to corestandards.org, they're a living work. Which means that those two private trade organizations that own those standards, they tell you on their website, the standards are intended to be a living work. As new and better evidence emerges, the standards will be revised accordingly. And that's great. If you're a teacher in a classroom and you're not working with copyrighted standards, we want our teachers to have the ability to adapt the standards. Not a private trade organization that will spring new standards on you in 2 weeks or 2 months or adapt them as they see fit. This is what we're against. We're not for this. This is one of the biggest reasons. But we have to ask ourselves, why do they put this limitation on liability? This is from Core Standards.